The evening was tranquil, characterized by profound silence. The evening descended upon quaint, familiar neighborhoods as the sun began to set behind the hills, casting a gentle amber glow through the windows. Ella stood by the kitchen counter, her hands delicately stirring the simmering pot while a soothing melody emanated from the old radio, enveloping the atmosphere in tranquility. It was the type of evening that consistently instilled in her a sense of grounding and security. Today, the sense of tranquility was augmented by the return of her son, Isaac. Isaac has recently returned from university. During a brief visit, a palpable sense of vitality permeated their quaint home. It felt like an instant since he was a young boy, brimming with insatiable curiosity and wide-eyed wonder. Now, at 21, he was no longer the child she recalled. He had evolved into a self-assured young man, thoughtful and occasionally enigmatic, as if harboring secrets just beyond her grasp. She glanced up upon hearing footsteps in the hallway and turned to see Isaac leaning nonchalantly against the door. His physique was more substantial than she remembered, his expression was serene yet possessed an intensity that rendered her somewhat uneasy. "Dinner is ready," she announced. He reciprocated her grin with warmth but remained stationary. His gaze lingered on her immediately. With a contemplative demeanor that caused her to briefly halt while seated across from him at the table, Ella observed the alterations in his actions and expressions. A more reserved and self-assured individual conversed about his classes during dinner. His new acquaintances and the minor details he longed for from home were evident, yet there was an unusual intensity in his gaze towards her that felt foreign. She dismissed it, attributing it to her imagination. After all, he was no longer her little boy but was maturing into an independent individual. Following dinner, Isaac proposed that they watch a movie together or engage in another activity. She concurred that they had not engaged in it for years. Content to revisit cherished traditions, they settled into the living room. The plush seats and subdued lighting fostered a lovely ambience, enveloping them in a collective warmth. The screen flickered as they reclined, allowing the narrative to captivate them, although Ella found herself distracted. Occasionally glancing at Isaac, the boy she once knew had indeed disappeared, supplanted by a young man she was still becoming acquainted with. However, as they sat side by side, she could not overlook the transformation in him, the manner in which he carried himself, the profundity of his gaze, the lingering pause in his words, and the way he shifted closer. She regarded it as merely a casual gesture while seated on the couch. It was not until his hand gently grazed hers that she experienced an unexpected spark, an unfamiliar pulse she could not identify. She withdrew her hand, her heart racing, hoping he had not observed her reaction. "What is wrong, Mom?" he inquired, his tone composed yet tinged with subtle concern as she regarded him mentally. Racing to regain her footing. "Nothing, just a little tired," she replied with a gentle smile, hoping it would end the moment, but even as they both returned their attention to the screen, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between them as she lay in bed that night. Her mind replayed those moments, his steady gaze, the closeness they shared, the quiet but potent energy that lingered between them. She told herself it was nothing and an overreaction, but deep down she knew that something had changed, the line of familiarity had blurred, and even if they hadn't crossed it, the air was thick with unspoken words and emotions. A quiet warning seemed to whisper from her thoughts that she needed to keep her distance, to let this feeling pass, but as she drifted into a restless she couldn't be sure if she'd be able to follow through. Ella awoke the next morning with a heavy feeling lingering from the night before. She lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, trying to shake off the restlessness that had haunted her dreams. It felt ridiculous. He was merely her son. She recognized her enduring affection for Isaac, yet an inexplicable change had occurred the previous night. She dismissed the notion, convincing herself that she was overthinking and allowing her imagination to run rampant. Upon descending the stairs, she found Isaac already in the kitchen, savoring a cup of coffee. His expression illuminated as she entered, the familiar aroma of freshly brewed coffee permeating the air, harmonizing with the gentle light filtering through the windows. "Morning, Mom," he greeted, his voice warm and nonchalant. As if nothing extraordinary had transpired the previous night, she sighed a sigh of relief. Perhaps she was merely overreading. Isaac responded with a slight smile as she poured herself a cup and joined him at the table. After a brief pause, he looked up, an idea illuminating his eyes. "I was thinking," he began, placing his mug down, "how about a hike we haven't taken?" They had not hiked together in years. It was once their shared passion, particularly during his youth, when they would spend hours traversing trails, exchanging stories, laughing, and creating memories. She paused momentarily. Although uncertain, she reassured herself that they were merely a mother and her sons enjoying time together, which was undoubtedly innocent. "Sure," she responded with a smile, "I'd love that." They drove to a nearby trail that held sentimental value for her, a familiar path they had traversed numerous times over the years, with the landscape unfolding before them, illuminated by the golden morning light. Illuminated by the towering trees, casting elongated shadows upon the earth, the atmosphere was invigorating and pure. For the first time since the previous night, Ella experienced a sense of tranquility akin to home. Perhaps this was precisely what they required, a return to the uncomplicated moments they once cherished. They ambled alongside each other, their dialogue oscillating between jovial subjects and reminiscences of yesteryears, evoking a subtle pang of nostalgia in Ella. Isaac narrated accounts of their excursions. In his youth, his eyes radiated enthusiasm as he recalled their escapes thus far. Despite the apparent ease of their discussion, Ella could not overlook the intermittent pauses and the quiet that felt somehow heated. Eventually, they arrived at a scenic overlook overlooking the valley below. Stretched across a mosaic of greens and browns, punctuated by vibrant wildflowers, they stood in contemplative silence, absorbing the vista. However, as Ella glanced at him, she discerned a distinct expression in his eyes, vulnerability and intensity that caused her heart to flutter. "You know you've always been there for me, Mom," he stated softly, his gaze firm and unwavering. "I don't know what I would do." His remark surprised her. Unexpectedly resonating with her, she had a surge of feeling, a blend of pride and protectiveness, yet also an indefinable quality. She compelled a light laugh, attempting to alleviate the gravity of the moment. "Well, you're stuck with me," she jested. "I'm not going anywhere," but he did not respond with laughter. Instead, he advanced closer, his gaze fixated on hers with an intensity that accelerated her heartbeat. "No, I mean it," he added, his tone gentle yet earnest, "you are more than merely my mother. You have consistently been paramount to me." Ella's heart raced once more. As she scrutinized his face, her heart raced, yearning for a trace of innocence or a sign of mere sentimentality. However, there was an undeniable intensity in his eyes that penetrated her tumultuous emotions. She was unprepared. She gently spoke to Isaac, her voice barely audible, "You know I love you." He nodded affirmatively, advancing closer. "Nevertheless, I am aware, and I reciprocate your affection." The remarks carried more weight than you comprehended. More significant than warranted. She found it difficult to maintain his gaze. Fearful of the discoveries that awaited her, she felt immobilized and conflicted between her enduring maternal love for him and the unsettling emotions his words evoked. "I believe we should return," she stammered, withdrawing slightly and taking a small step back. "It's getting late." However, before she could turn away, he reached out and grasped her hand with his touch. Soft yet persistent, she had an involuntary spark. The sensation traveled up her arm, an inexplicable emotion that left her disturbed. "Ella," he muttered, his voice soft. Spoken in a hushed tone, "I find it difficult to articulate this. However, I believe you perceive it in her thoughts." She yelled at her to release her grip and create distance, yet she felt immobilized. Unable to move and unable to avert her gaze from the conflicted expression in his eyes, she eventually spoke, "Isaac, please." Trembling and bewildered, he recognized her as his mother. Her words appeared to impact him, and she observed a fleeting expression of pain on his face. As he relinquished her hand and stepped back, the awareness of their near transgression lingered between them, a tacit recognition that their relationship had approached a perilous boundary. "I'm sorry," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "I did not intend to cause you discomfort." She swallowed hard, her heart beating as she attempted to regain her composure. "It's acceptable," she murmured gently, though she was not fully certain if it was. "Let us proceed." Upon returning home, they strolled in silence, the tension between them more palpable than ever. Ella's mind raced, her thoughts a chaotic amalgamation of feelings she could not disentangle. She reassured herself that this, too, would pass. Although they wished to return to the previous state of affairs, she inherently saw that a fundamental change had occurred, rendering a return impossible. The journey home was enveloped in quiet, each mile burdened by unexpressed stress, which Ella grasped tightly. Gripping the steering wheel, her eyes focused on the road ahead, her mind was tumultuous with conflicting thoughts. She sensed Isaac's presence beside her, his stance was rigid, and his gaze was distant, as if he were ensnared in his own realm of uncertainty. She felt a need to speak. To shatter the intolerable silence, yet every word that surfaced seemed inadequate. Burdened and overwhelmed, upon arriving at the driveway, Isaac murmured a brief, scarcely audible expression of gratitude for the trek. Before entering, Ella observed as he ascended. She descended the stairs, leaving herself in the oppressive silence that enveloped the house. She collapsed onto the couch, pressing her palms to her temples in an attempt to regulate her breathing, reassuring herself that it was merely an innocuous moment being exaggerated. After all, she was his mother. Their connection was intended to be profound and significant, although despite her efforts, she could not dispel the recollection of his gaze on the trail, the intensity in his eyes and the proximity that seemed distinctly complex. As the evening progressed, Ella occupied herself. Engaged in minor duties to prevent her thoughts from reverting to previous occurrences, she tidied the remnants of their breakfast and wiped off the counters. And tidied the living room completely. In a futile endeavor to divert her attention. Despite her attempts to reassure herself that this tension was merely a transient misunderstanding, an unsettling sensation persisted in the recesses of her mind. She murmured that circumstances would irrevocably change with the onset of darkness, then withdrew to her bedroom, yearning for sleep to provide some clarity. She reclined in the darkness, the stillness of the house enveloping her as her thoughts raced. She wished to believe that Isaac's feelings were merely a transient phase, a manifestation of confusion and a quest for direction. However, a part of her questioned whether she bore some responsibility. Had she been excessively close or affectionate? She loved him profoundly, yet she pondered if her love had transgressed an imperceptible boundary. Unbeknownst to her, precisely as she began to succumb to slumber, her heart raced as a gentle knock on her door startled her awake. A momentary pause ensued as she sat upright, her thoughts swirling with both anticipation and apprehension, when her mother, Isaac, called from outside the door. Timid and subdued, she wavered, contemplating. She hesitated before deciding to respond, then took a steadying breath and shouted out, "Come in." The door cracked open, and Isaac entered, his expression a blend of confusion and guilt. He lingered at the entrance, his gaze fixed on the floor as if he feared meeting her she saw. After a little interval, he resumed walking. She sat down on the edge of her bed. Maintaining a respectful distance, he apologized, beginning his statement. In a barely audible tone, "I did not intend to create an awkward situation earlier. I am uncertain of what prompted my behavior." Ella experienced an overwhelming surge of melancholy. As she gazed at him, her heart bled at the vulnerability reflected in his eyes. She extended her hand and placed it on his shoulder, offering a reassuring squeeze. "It's all right, Isaac," she said gently. Her voice was calm yet soothing. "We are merely navigating our circumstances. It is customary to experience a sense of closeness, as we have always been close." He nodded his shoulders, exhibiting relaxation. There was a subtle flash of unresolved emotion in his expression. "I am uncertain why I feel this way, Mom. I have attempted to disregard it and suppress it, yet it persists." His confession really affected her, eliciting a surge of empathy and sorrow. She aimed to soothe him, conveying that everything would be fine, but she saw the necessity of establishing boundaries for their mutual benefit. "Isaac," she continued gently, her tone infused with both compassion and resolve, we have always shared a unique connection. However, I am your mother, and that is my exclusive role. We must not allow our emotions to obscure this fact. He nodded slowly, yet she sensed the anguish in his eyes and the unexpressed words he was suppressing. I know, he mumbled, his gaze fixed. As she collapsed to the floor, her heart ached with the fear of losing you. Upon hearing his words, a profound sorrow surged within her. You will not lose me, she reassured him softly, but perhaps it is prudent for us to take some time apart for the moment. The proposal lingered heavily between them. Recognizing it as the appropriate course of action yet hesitant to fully accept it, Isaac nodded, his look a blend of comprehension and remorse. Yes, he replied softly, perhaps you are correct. They then lapsed into silence. The weight of their conversation enveloped them like a fog. Ella extended her hand, offering a gentle squeeze, before withdrawing, the finality of their decision permeating the atmosphere. She recognized that distancing themselves would not be simple, yet it was the sole means to safeguard their relationship from transgressing boundaries that could never be retracted. Good night, Isaac, she whispered. Providing a slight comforting grin, he whispered, Good night, Mom, as he exited the room, gently closing the door behind him. Ella reclined. Reclining against her pillows, she gazed at the ceiling, overwhelmed by a tumult of emotions. She recognized that they had made the correct decision, yet this realization did not alleviate her discomfort. The house felt increasingly desolate and solitary. As she succumbed to a restless slumber, she could not dispel the sense that something invaluable in their relationship had irrevocably altered. With the dawn, sunlight filtered through the blinds, creating gentle patterns in Ella's bedroom, prompting her to awaken. Temporarily oblivious to the preceding day's occurrences, she was soon engulfed by a flood of melancholy that anchored her in reality, as the recollections of her late-night dialogue with Isaac loomed like a burdensome shadow, embodying a blend of affection and grief. Constrained by her emotions, she rose and traversed the house silently, her movements measured and intentional, as if to evade exacerbating any residual tension. Isaac's room was devoid of sound. She was aware he would depart shortly, returning to college ahead of schedule. It was a prudent choice, she reassured herself, a necessary boundary to facilitate their mutual recalibration. Yet, as she passed his door, the prospect of his departure engendered an insistent emptiness she could not dismiss. In the kitchen, Ella occupied herself with the preparation of coffee. She engaged in the old process, pouring herself a mug for a momentary distraction. She savored the warmth in her palms and took a seat at the window, observing the leaves outside move gently in the breeze. She could not recall the last instant she experienced such restlessness and emotional exhaustion. It felt as though a fragment of her was diminishing. The gentle sound of footfall interrupted her thoughts, revealing the significance of a component she had not before recognized. Isaac entered the kitchen, his countenance a blend of confusion and melancholy. He oversaw a modest brave. He mumbled good morning with a smile. She responded with a scarcely audible whisper, Good morning. She offered a gentle grin, although it did not fully resonate with her emotions. Their gazes descended into an uncomfortable quiet. The burden of unexpressed words lingered between them. Ella desired to articulate her thoughts, seeking solace in words that could alleviate the forthcoming farewell, yet each utterance seemed insufficient, incapable of encapsulating the profundity of her feelings. Isaac filled his cup with coffee and cast a lingering glance in her direction. I will complete my packing in AIT, he stated softly, and likely depart within the hour. She nodded, striving to maintain a composed demeanor. That seems prudent, she replied. I believe that some distance will be beneficial for us. Indeed, he responded, his voice heavy. With sentiment, I concur. They took a seat. They are both enjoying their coffee in silence, contemplating the reality of their decisions. Settling over them like a fog, neither wished to bid farewell, yet both recognized its necessity. Ella endeavored to concentrate on the benefits this separation would provide, believing it would offer the clarity required to restore their previously blurred boundaries. However, the prospect of the vacant house, the silent rooms, and the void of his presence rendered her feeling hollow. An hour later, Ella stood by the doorway as Isaac collected his belongings, his movements deliberate. Slow and deliberate, as if he too was hesitant to depart, she observed him, her heart burdened by a blend of love, sorrow, and regret. She yearned to embrace him, to reassure him that all would be well, yet she recognized that such comfort would not benefit either of them at that moment. When he ultimately approached the door, he hesitated, casting a glance back. He mumbled to her with a bittersweet smile, "Thanks, Mom," his voice imbued with quiet strength. Despite her constricted throat and unshed tears, she managed to smile. "Take care of yourself," Isaac said, his voice barely audible. "Remain composed, and recall that I am perpetually available to support you." Nodded, his eyes shimmering with profundity. An expression of feeling that conveyed significant meaning. "I am certain I will see you shortly." With a final lingering glance, he turned and exited, leaving Ella in silence, her heart bleeding as she observed his departure. The emptiness of the home was suffocating. Each area was imbued with memories of their common tie, the times now appearing remote and frail. As time elapsed, Ella endeavored to return to her customary regimen, occupying her time. Amidst work acquaintances and minor pastimes that occupied her thoughts, she hoped that time would alleviate their difficulties and that the choice to create distance would provide the clarity they both required. However, in tranquil moments when the house was silent and memories resurfaced, she could not dismiss the enduring sense of loss. Their relationship would never revert to its former state. In several respects, she acknowledged her comprehension that change was unavoidable. Their love was intricate and occasionally agonizing, yet she recognized that they had made the correct decision, despite the anguish. For both individuals, this distance served as a means to heal and to redefine their relationship in a manner that was secure and beneficial. One evening, while seated by the window and observing the sunset over the tranquil neighborhood, Ella permitted herself a moment of introspection. She contemplated Isaac, the son she had nurtured, the young man he had evolved into, and the enduring love they would always share, as well as the journey they had undertaken together. Their relationship was intricate, characterized by fluctuations, yet it constituted a unique bond. She cherished deeply. As the sky darkened, a quiet sense of acceptance enveloped her. This marked the commencement of a new chapter characterized by boundaries, respect, and understanding. Although the path ahead was uncertain, she was confident that, in time, they would reunite, renewed and whole. If you were in Ella's situation, confronted with the issue of redefining a close relationship while maintaining limits, what actions would you take? Would you like to maintain distance or confront the emotions directly? Please share your opinions. I would appreciate your insights on how to get through this intricate circumstance.